All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where US President Donald Trump has escalated his attacks on mail-in voting, when he's suggesting that the results of the 2020 presidential elections that are slated to be held in the month of November may never actually be accurately determined. Now, Trump in a tweet said, and I quote him here, "Because of the new and unprecedented massive amount of unsolicited ballots which will be sent to voters or wherever this year, the 3rd of November election results may never be accurately determined, which is what some want. Another election disaster yesterday, stop ballot madness," unquote. He also went on to make his attacks on voting by mail as a system that would be vulnerable to fraud, even as state officials continue to vouch for it as an alternative to in-person voting during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Trump is currently lagging behind his Democrat challenger Joe Biden in public opinion polls. Election experts who've studied decades of US elections have said that fraud is fairly rare in American politics. Now, Twitter has placed a warning label on this tweet by Trump, saying that his post included potentially misleading information regarding the process of mail-in voting. Now, Twitter's warning label has redirected users to a page which contained more information on mail-in voting. Now, the microblogging site has in the past attached labels to tweets posted and shared by Trump. 16 states require an excuse to vote absenteeism. The other 34 states allow any registered voter to request for a mail ballot. Now, Trump has claimed that the latter system is, of course, prone to fraud. In the 2016 US elections, 25% of the ballots were cast by mail-in votes. The 3rd of November election promises to be the nation's largest test of voting by mail, and according to data from recent state and local elections, Democrats are embracing mail-in voting, and this is being done by them in a manner that is much more open than what is being described for the Republicans, who have raised questions about the mail-in voting system. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of the controversy that is playing out in the United States over this mail-in voting system and how much of an impact it will have on the elections that are slated to be held on the 3rd of November. We're joined in by Jagruti Dave, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, Jagruti, give us a sense of this entire controversy about mail-in voting system. This is something that Donald Trump has been harping upon for the last several weeks, all during his campaigning. Is there a real risk that mail-in voting could be more prone to fraud? And how much of the voting this time round is likely to take place by mail-in voting?
So because of the coronavirus pandemics, many states are expecting there to be an increase in the number of people who want to vote by mail. People are less likely to want to stand in line, even with social distancing. Many people would rather avoid it. Many people who are vulnerable and who would prefer to not go out as well, elderly people, for example, they think that those are the sorts of people who might be likely to want to vote by mail. So many states are expecting a surge in mail-in voting. Now, President Trump has for a long time been criticising mail-in voting, specifically those instances where states automatically send in a ballot by mail for people to use to vote by mail, the universal mail-in ballots. And he's sort of distinguishing between that and where people apply for a mail-in ballot, where they say, I want to vote by mail, not where they get one automatically. In practice, there isn't really that much distinction in terms of the process, other than in one case somebody asks for it, in another case the state automatically sends it to them. There is no evidence for states where universal mail-in ballots are used. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud for mail-in ballots and in voting in general in the United States. So critics of the president are saying that this is a strategy that the president is using to cast doubt on the result of the election should he lose in November.
Absolutely. And at this point of time, to what extent is he trailing Joe Biden?
Well, there are many national polls that have taken place that show that there is a gap between Joe Biden and President Trump, that Joe Biden is in the lead. Different polls measure those leads with different measures. Those leads are narrowing, it must be said. Joe Biden's lead is narrowing in some polls, it must be said. And so there are several races which are pretty close when we look at battleground states, for example. You know, there are several states like Wisconsin, where Donald Trump won by a very narrow margin in 2016, and he wants to retain that state. It's, you know, battleground states like Florida, which has one of the largest share of electoral college votes. That's an interesting state because both parties are reaching out to Latino voters in that state, and polls suggest that Joe Biden is actually the one who is underperforming with Latino voters in Florida. So he's really making a pitch to voters there. We heard recently that Mike Bloomberg, the billionaire former mayor of New York, is putting forward millions of his own money to support Joe Biden's campaign in that particular battleground state. So, you know, the polls are suggesting that it is going to be a close race, and it's, you know, we're less than 2 months to November's election. So, you know, both campaigns are really kind of amping up their campaigning as we get to that finish line.
Absolutely, indeed. And lastly, just before I let you go, so this tweet that Donald Trump, of course, put out stating that there is a possibility of fraud because of mail-in voting, Twitter has, of course, decided to fact-check it. It has also put out a disclaimer. Now, the question that a lot of people would ask is, does Twitter do this to every tweet that is misleading, or does it specifically choose out certain handles where it would like to fact-check, like it is doing in the case of Donald Trump? This is not the first time that it has happened that Twitter has been fact-checking Donald Trump.
No, if Twitter and many of the social media giants have been criticised for failing to curb the spread of disinformation on their platforms. So this is something that Twitter has actively tried to do in the face of quite staunch criticism. And it's not the only social media platform, as I say, that is experienced this backlash and this pressure to do something about the spread of disinformation. And if you look at what the FBI director has been saying to a House committee today, he has been saying that actually foreign interference on social media is a potential problem. And he says that Russia is one of the perpetrators using social media and the spread of disinformation there. This is according to the FBI, and they say that they are specifically primarily doing it to denigrate the campaign of Vice President Joe Biden. So it is a clear problem that social media needs to tackle, and that Twitter is, to some extent, trying to get to grips with.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Jagriti Dave, for joining us and getting us all those insights.